Lucky for you, I'm weak.
Are you kidding me?
I knew Tam was weak.
What do you think you're doing?
Exploring the impact of the French invasion on Imperial Russian society.
Well,
Hi, welcome to Stories from the Shire. This is my first video where I will be reviewing my favourite book, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Now, I have this gorgeous Penguin cloth-bound classics edition, which is translated by Anthony Briggs. I first read this about 3 or 4 years ago during the height of the pandemic, lockdown, and I remember spending hours, way past my bedtime, right, sleepless nights, trying to find out what my favourite characters were up to and really pondering over a lot of the philosophical and historical questions that Tolstoy had posed for us, the readers. That was the Maud translation by Louise Alima Maud, which is the original translation. It's a bit more classic in terms of language or writing style, but you don't have to worry about the translations. You can pick up any translation. Not that the Briggs translation is bad. It's a bit more modern, update for the modern reader, but as you'll find out if you do ever get to read this book, I would say that Tolstoy's writing style is very, very accessible. But I have the Briggs translation, and as you can see, this is a massive book. It's a monster of a book. It's not a book that you can read in 1 day or 2 days or even a week. I remember I took about a month or so in total to read this book. It was lockdown, and well, you can't really just start reading from the middle. You can't just pick out a random page and start reading from there. You need to follow the story from the start to the end of the book. You could categorize this as a slow burn. You need to be patient with War and Peace. It's a book that really needs the commitment of the reader just because of the sheer size of the book, 1,200 odd pages. So you need to be just a little bit patient with this book. So what is War and Peace about? At a very broad level, War and Peace is about the impact of Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion on Russian society, how Russian society kind of interacts and reacts to the invasion of Napoleon Bonaparte, how all the characters come to terms with and react to the French invasion of Russia. That's what this book is about. That's what the plot is about at a very broad level. Now, we must start with what exactly War and Peace is. Okay, Tolstoy himself does not consider War and Peace to be a novel. He always said that Anna Karenina was his first novel, and to be fair to Tolstoy, I would agree with him. Right? In his contemporary literary world, back then in the 19th century, War and Peace was not a novel. It was not considered to be a novel. It didn't follow the same tropes as a novel, at least in his time, right? But then there are some books that push the boundaries, kind of defy all the trends and make new trends, trailblazers, so to speak. And I think that War and Peace changed the novel in many, many ways. It pushed the limits of what a novel could be, right? There are no heroes and villains. Actually, these characters, they are pretty grey and grey, which is not something that we used to say back in the 19th century, right? These characters are flawed, okay? There are no villains and heroes, as I said. Some of them are downright horrible people. You hate them. But that's just Tolstoy being a trailblazer. That's what it is. I've heard some people compare War and Peace to epics, to the Mahabharata or to the Iliad or the Odyssey. That's also true. You can also call it, as I do, a historical fiction because it has historical characters like Napoleon Bonaparte, General Kutuzov, the Tsars of Russia, the aristocracy of Russia and France and Austria and all these European powers. You can call it a historical fiction as well. Whatever you want to call it is irrelevant. There's no doubting that War and Peace is a great, great piece of literature. So let's dive right into this. I'm going to put this down because this is heavy, okay? You can really lift weights with this. So I'm going to put this down for the time being. So, what is War and Peace about? Now, I think that this book is very appropriately named. It's about war and it's about peace. We follow the lives of our characters as we go from the front of the battle lines back into civilian life. We follow the lives of our characters as they navigate Russian society and how they adapt to this invasion of Russia by a foreign power, by Napoleon Bonaparte. One thing that I think is very clear in War and Peace is that this is a fundamentally Christian piece of literature. This is a fundamentally Christian book. Right? What I mean by that is that most of the ideas that are portrayed in this book are fundamentally Christian ideas and themes such as love and forgiveness and sin, redemption, repentance, rejuvenation, transition, turning a new page in your life, right? The book not only talks about romantic love, but also familial love or friendly love, and particularly the materialistic or the material aspects of love and the practicalities of love and how they are different and complex, different from the expectations of love. For example, there's a young teenage girl who has a lot of idealistic expectations of love. When she finally finds love, she finds it to be complex and difficult in a very practical sense. Okay, love is complex, yes. Anyone who has been in love will attest to that fact. Yes, love is complex, and that love is a test, right? And that we shouldn't have some idealistic, over the top, overly romantic notions of love. That is, it is difficult to be in love and to keep being in love. War and Peace is also about sin and forgiveness, right? As I said, these characters are not heroes, right? They're brave, sure, but they're just as brave as ordinary people, right? Just as brave as you and me, right? These characters are flawed, right? They make mistakes, they make horrible mistakes. Some of them are downright horrible people, even. But towards the end of the book, most of them, they are forgiven, they are redeemed, they go through a lot. There's repentance. Some of them even die towards the end of the book, and they find their peace. They make their peace with the world. They find in a peace they are forgiven, they are redeemed, even at their deathbeds. One of the key themes that I particularly liked in this book is rejuvenation, right? Turning a new page in your life, starting afresh, clicking the reset button. Again, very much Christian, very much drawing from Tolstoy's Christianity. A lot of these characters towards the end, I think that this is quite a happy ending. This book has somewhat of a happy ending. A lot of the characters, they do either settle down or they make their peace with life, they start afresh. And that is something that appeals to me, someone like me who has gone through many transitions in life. I'm sure it must be appealing to a lot of people, right? The whole idea of starting afresh. You've done what you could till now, you have sinned, you have made mistakes, but that doesn't mean that you can't be saved. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. You can always make amends for your mistakes. That's what Tolstoy's trying to say here. Sidebar, we do know actually that Tolstoy was very much a Christian, but he was not a fan of organized religion, organized Christianity. Okay? Towards the end of his life, we know that he kind of took a step back from society and from communal life, kind of lived in a secluded area with his wife. I've heard the term anarcho-Christianity thrown around a lot to describe Tolstoy's beliefs. He was certainly a difficult man to live with. That's what everyone says, right? And maybe I agree with that categorization, anarcho-Christianity. He believed, I would say, that everyone should find his or her own God, and everyone deserves to find inner peace in their own ways. Okay, now something that is prevalent throughout the book, right, from page 1 to the very end, okay, are Tolstoy's ideas of history and philosophy, politics, the war aspect of War and Peace, essentially. So Tolstoy has these kind of explanatory chapters where he just takes a break from the ordinary narrative, and he takes some time to really theorize and explain and try to convince the reader about his theories about history and war and politics and so on and so forth. For me personally, those chapters were the icing on the cake. I loved those chapters. I'm very much into all these things. You may not. You may have a different opinion of those chapters if you do get to read them. But please don't skip them. They're not super nerdy. You don't need to be an expert to understand what he's trying to say in those chapters, right? That's the beauty of this book, according to me. It's really interesting. I think he takes any battle or historical event, so to speak, that is related to the narrative in some way or fashion, and then he applies what I call integral calculus to that event, try to break down the event into smaller and smaller pieces, trying to analyze them, and then he uses that analysis to prove a point, to prove why certain things happen as they do. He's a big fan of what he calls the irrationality principle, right? Why do things occur as they do? Why do some armies lose despite having a numeric superiority? Why are some battles won despite having a numeric disadvantage? I think he very much believes in the butterfly effect. When a butterfly flaps its wings in the past, it will lead to some great catastrophic change in the future, right? And he uses this principle to examine and then examine historical events, examine wars, right? What are the soldiers thinking on the battlefield? He says that a battle is won or lost if the collective wills of the soldiers are pointing in the right direction. If they are pointing in the right direction, the battle can be won despite not having a numeric advantage, right? And then, of course, there is his absolute aversion to the great man theory of history. Now, what is the great man theory of history? Now, the great man theory of history is a way of studying and looking at history from the point of view of these great men, these great leaders, great historical and political figures, right? The great man theory of history basically states that history is being driven by these great men and these great extraordinary men, these geniuses, right? I'm talking about the emperors and the kings and the princes and the presidents, prime ministers, the Obamas, the Trumps, the Modis, the Putins, the Xis of the world, right? They are the ones that impact history, and we should be studying their lives to get a better understanding of history itself. But Tolstoy says, no, that's not how we should be studying or looking at history. We should instead be focusing on the grand, the so-called currents, socio-political currents that instead drive these great men who are just there at the right place at the right time. And he says that the individual objectives or the individual wills of people, of nations, are what instead drive history forward, and obviously the great men are just a manifestation of that force of will. That, I think, is one of the core ideas expressed in War and Peace. You're going to find this idea cropping up again and again and again. From the very beginning to the very end, you can find this idea, and many other philosophical and historical and ethical, moral dilemmas and questions that Tolstoy wants us, the reader, to ponder over. And as you read more Russian literature, you'll find that it's not just Tolstoy who's doing this. It's almost the entire spectrum of Russian writers and thinkers and authors. They want you to really grapple, really wrestle with the ideas that they are writing about, they are expressing in their books. Sidebar. The concept of the great man theory of history is very similar, I feel is very similar to the concept of the Übermensch that was put forward by Friedrich Nietzsche. Übermensch as in a kind of superhuman figure who transcends the ethical and moral limitations of man, almost like God. And what you have to understand about the Übermensch and other similar ideas is that these ideas were actually floating around Western Europe at the time. And now I think that is interesting that you see these Russian writers like Tolstoy, like Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, and many other of his novels, kind of wrestling with these ideas, kind of interacting with these ideas, kind of pushing back, kind of countering these ideas of the Übermensch, these destructive ideas of the Übermensch that are coming in from Western Europe. They're countering those ideas with ideas of their own, and books like War and Peace are a testament to the greatness of Russian literature, Russian authors in general. Now, one of the many impediments that people have while reading such works of literature, especially the older literary works, is the writing style, right? As I've said before, Tolstoy's writing style and the writing style that was eventually translated into English is quite accessible. However, you will find at points that this novel does feel like a kind of gossipy soap opera like form of entertainment, right? There's a lot of gossips, a lot of parties where discussions do range from marriage and scandal and affairs all the way up to politics. And this might seem a bit pointless at times, but I would advise you to read through the entire book from start to finish. Do not worry about those chapters. You can easily just breeze through those parts and focus on the things that you like. Now, War and Peace is structured in a way that spans 15 years, and it often jumps from the battlefield to the civilian life, to society, and then back to the battlefield. And in the middle, sometimes you're going to have these so-called interlocutor or explanatory chapters where it's just Tolstoy, the narrator, talking to us about his theories, about his ideas, and his conclusions. And that's one of the reasons why I've always maintained that War and Peace is such a well-named novel. War and Peace. What you see is what you get. That's what the title is on the cover. It transitions seamlessly from war to peace, and then the explanatory chapters. Now, coming to what I think are some of the most enjoyable aspects of War and Peace, that is the characters, right? There are so many characters. I think some 500 odd named characters in this book. Not all of them are important, by the way. There's just a handful of characters that you really need to keep track of. And because the book is so big, and because the book spans 15 odd years of time, this allows Tolstoy to really allow his characters to grow and mature into their own. It's 15 years, right? And almost all the characters, they go through a transition phase. They become better people, right? These characters are so brilliantly written, right? These characters, they feel like real people. They're not real people, but they feel like real people. Their dialogue is so real. Their emotions are so real, very relatable. As I said, there's a young teenage girl who is very excited about love and very idealistic about love. She changes her opinions about love, or she changes her perspective about love, and she matures and she grows up into a different person, a much better person. There's also a very anxious and very awkward awkward man who has a lot of bright ideas, has a lot of good ideas. He's an intellectual, so to speak, and he's always experimenting with these ideologies, political ideologies, historical ideologies, philosophical ideologies, and in the end, he finds that he doesn't need any of those to find inner peace. You will find these characters becoming your best friends. You'll become invested in their success, invested in the plot because of that, because they're just so relatable, right? It's almost as if it's you who is in their shoes. I mean, we're not all nobles or aristocrats, right? But I'm sure all of us had thought that we'd be doing one particular thing with our lives, and then we end up doing something completely different, right? I know I certainly have, and the characters in this book have as well. But Tolstoy says that that's all right. People change their feelings, their ideas all the time. People change, and that's not particularly a bad thing. Like, people change, they mature. You must change and mature, right? And that's what Tolstoy is trying to tell us. Now, here is why I personally like War and Peace, why I think this is my favourite book of all time. And I've read so many novels after War and Peace. You know, I read this three years ago, 4 years ago. I've read so many novels after War and Peace, and I'm yet to find a novel that can match or that is better than War and Peace. And here's why, right? First of all, War and Peace is knee deep into history, philosophy, right? All these intellectual, nerdy things that I personally enjoy, right? As I said, I enjoyed the explanatory chapters wherein Tolstoy just jumps out of the narrative and starts talking to you, the reader, about his grand theories of history and blah, 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 blah. I like those chapters, right? They're the icing on the cake for me, right? I like history, I like philosophy, I do like my politics as well. So that's one of the reasons why I just adore War and Peace. Now, the next reason is actually a bit personal, right? I'm not someone who does well with change, right? I know that many people struggle with change, right? We're all flawed people, right? We all have made mistakes in our lives, right? And so too have the characters in War and Peace, right? These characters, they grow up, they mature into human beings that are at peace with themselves. They find inner peace. They are redeemed. They forgive and they learn to love. And yes, they go through tremendous change, tremendous transition. It's a goddamn war. Their country is being invaded. That's the transition that they all have to deal with. Almost all of them, in one form or the other, one way or the other, they turn a new chapter in their lives. They click the reset button. How many of us have wanted to click the reset button? How many of us have wanted to be better versions of ourselves? So if these characters could do it, if Pierre Bekizov could do it, if Andrei Bolkonsky could do it, if they could find it in their hearts to forgive people that have wronged them, and then in doing that, turn a new chapter in their lives, hit the reset button, why can't we? And I think that this is also true for young people, right? Many of the people that I meet, many people in general, they are filled with regrets. I know I certainly am, right? So in that sense, this book is like a spiritual journey, right? You don't need to read all those self-help books. You don't need to listen to those motivational talks. You can just pick up a copy of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, and maybe this book will help you find that piece of yours. And that is why I think that this book is one of the best pieces of literature that I have ever set my hands on. Again, I can't wait to use what Tolstoy has taught me in this book, and to hit the reset button and turn a new chapter in my life. And I hope that this book also does the same for you. I hope you will pick up and read this book. It's one of the best books ever written. I hope this book review has inspired you to pick up this book, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Thank you for listening in, and this was my first video. Thank you for joining me here at Stories from the Shire. I hope you have a gorgeous day. Thank you.